All right. Well, meeting will come to order. This is the Rules and Government Relations meeting of August 27th, 2020. It's 5:30 p.m. I guess it's 5:32 p.m. now. No one's here for public speak. Peg, we do have some minutes since the last time, right?
I think so.
Yes. So yeah, I did get a chance to look at those. Those were the minutes for the 13th. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of August 13th.
Let me make that motion. I'll make the motion to approve the minutes of 8/13.
Second. All in favor. Councillor Coniff.
Aye. Aye.
Councillor Peak votes aye. Okay, great. So with that out of the way, let's turn. We've got two things that we were going to discuss tonight. One of them is the resolution regarding payment in lieu of taxes, and the other one is the request to establish easthampton.gov emails for committee chairs. Any preference on the order to which we handle those? Anyone?
I think, well, if I get a vote, the .gov ones might be easier to take care of.
Okay. Yeah, then let's do that first.
Of course, it is Owens, so that shouldn't rule anything in or out.
Never know. So yeah, all right, let's start with that. Owen and Bill, you submitted this. Do you want to walk us through where it is and what you'd like to see happen from here?
Bill, you want to go first, or should you want me to take it?
Go for it. You're unmuted, So,
one thing that I've certainly seen in my brief time on the council now, 3 years, 1.5 terms, is that there's definitely an increasing demand, a need to access city committees that are non-city council committees. There seems to be a lot of things happening, and people want to be able to participate more, and their participation has expanded beyond attending actual committee meetings and wanting to make sure that they're able to provide feedback to specific committee members, certainly the chairs, but also individual committee members. This kind of also expands more generally to an ongoing discussion about making sure that the way that we disseminate information and make information accessible and visible to members of the public of Easthampton and beyond is done with more ease and to maintain transparency. So and then kind of apropos of this discussion, it turns out that I attended the CRC meeting the other day, and one of their agenda items specifically was to make sure that their committee is accessible, and they actually mentioned this specific agenda item. So it's complicated because I'd love for the city to just be able to provide every single person who comes in and sits on a committee with an email, but I think that creates a lot of undue work, certainly for the IT department who already have limited resources. But I was thinking at least committee chairs should have some form of Easthampton mass.gov email, and I think those could all be created. And Chairman Peak, I sent you an email earlier where I was thinking that they could just basically all say either chair, chair, the name of the committee at easthamptonmass.gov, or just simply the name of the committee at easthamptonmass.gov. And when a chair is appointed, they'll notify probably the clerk or notify the IT department, who will then provide them with the login information for that email. And whenever a new chair is elected, they'll have to reset the password just so outgoing chairs don't have access anymore. And then also in an email I sent to you this week, I was thinking in general, people would like to access members of committees. So with multi-member committees, I do think part of participating in a public process and a public committee means that there has to be some degree of public visibility. And I understand people's desire to kind of protect their privacy, but it's not too difficult to create like a Gmail account. And so I do think that one thing to consider beyond being able to access the chair is to be able to move beyond that, be able to access any individual member of a committee. And so maybe asking committee members to list their emails as well, because for instance, if the chair sends some sort of feedback that is essentially result in some form of deliberation, if they forwarded it to everybody within the committee, that's an open meeting law potentially. So that goes back again in terms of allowing everyone who's on a committee access to information to be able to participate in the public process and let the public reach them. I was thinking it might be a good idea to have them have to provide some sort of email when they sign on. That's most of my thoughts. And then I had discussed this with Councillor Lynch because he's on the appointments committee, the chair of the appointments committee, and I thought that he'd probably have some thoughts about this as well, and that's why we brought this forward together.
Okay, great. Okay, so also it's interesting. Councillor Gomez, thanks for joining. I hope I didn't keep you. I just noticed that there was another participant. Okay. So that all sounds good. Have either of you reached out to the city in terms of just like what the logistics might look like for getting emails, like for our like easthamptonma.gov email addresses? Do those emails cost the city anything to establish or to maintain? Is that, and I just don't know how those, like how we do that, whether there's any sort of like fiscal implications for this.
I haven't had a chance yet, although for some reason I feel like I did have a small conversation about this, but I can't remember if it was directly with, is it Ashley who is, or someone related to that process where it's not like you pay for every single email, you pay for a license to have X amount of emails for a, essentially a corporation. So it's like 0 to 10, 10 to 100, 100 to 1,000, something like that. That was my understanding. And I apologize, I can't remember if I directly had that conversation or if someone basically provided me with that. But I was waiting to see how the process went here to kind of take the next steps.
Right. Well, that's just something I'd be curious. Just to be clear, I think this is a great idea, but just in terms of doing the due diligence and making sure that we're getting this to work right. That is one thing that I'd like some more information on, is what sort of logistically that looks like. Another thing that I'm wondering is just like, what kind of vote are you actually envisioning? Like, is this going to be like an ordinance saying that every person must do this, or is this a resolution where we're asking the city to do this, or like what's the actual like legislative process we're taking here?
I mean, I thought about that. I think ultimately it would to build consensus to basically request the mayor to do this, because I think as the chief executive and having control of the information technology department, I think that'd be the easiest way to do it. I'm not sure how we can, for instance, make like ordinance that would create legislation to because this is it's almost like a human resource thing. I think this falls more into the executive branch, at least. If anyone has other feelings about this, let me know. But I think that was the kind of the sticky wicket. Was I just wanted to be able to develop consensus to basically give recommendations to the mayor to do this, to allow us to make this happen.
Right. So it would be, no, I mean, yeah, I feel like, I mean, I don't anticipate any sort of pushback. Councilor Conniff, did
You
you?
can finish your thought. I'm just letting you know that when you're done.
Oh, great. I don't anticipate that there'd be a lot of pushback from the mayor's office. I just, whenever we want the mayor's office to do something, there's always this familiar road we go down about how exactly legislatively, not the mayor's office specifically, but whenever we want the city to do something, we've had this conversation a number of times before. But yeah, so, okay, I'm cool with the idea of this, like, Councilor, yeah, what do you think, Councilor Conniff?
So I originally thought there was already something somewhere around committees, whether it's in the charter or whether it's in an administrative code. I'm not entirely sure, but I think we could certainly, make a recommendation to the mayor if we vote to make such a recommendation in full council for her support and her execution of this. She certainly can say no, but I think maybe that's where we're heading, is to make a recommendation and a request that she make it so. If it is something that's already in an administrative code, we can go that route. The only other concern, if you want to call it a concern, is around Freedom of Information Act. And once they are in the .gov email system, are they then subject to Freedom of Information requests? And that would require a certain level of communication with all the chairs about what they can and cannot say in email. So we need to be cognizant of the fact that I think it's great, but I just want to make sure, and maybe that's an attorney question, if public bodies, which I'm already going to answer my own question, are subject to Freedom of Information, and I believe they are. So, that's just something that we'll have to kind of put some parameters around so that people aren't, ordering Amazon using their email address and things like that. Right.
I mean, in a lot of ways, I could. Sorry, I see both your hands. I'll make this quick. Like, in a lot of ways, it seems like really all this, the minimum that this email would have to do is just be set up so that you could say, because, so for there's like this Dunkin' Donuts thing, and I have some constituents who aren't crazy about it. So they're sending me stuff saying, hey, I don't want this. And I'm like, well, okay, that's valid, but you should really be saying that to the planning board. Like, how do I say that to the planning board? Oh, I don't know, actually. So what I've been doing is forwarding things to Jeff and Jamie and hoping that they'll relay them. But that is sort of a time-consuming process. If there was just something that said planning board at easthampton.ma.gov, that when you sent it to, it would just automatically forward that communication to all the people involved, and then they could make a determination as to whether or not they wanted to reply and engage that person. That to me seems like the bare minimum that you need. It's just something that's set up to forward any communications to the members. Councilor Zaret, you had your hand up first, I think.
Well, but I talked a lot, so I would defer to Councilor Lynch, and then I'm happy.
Fair enough. Councilor Lynch.
Thank you, Councilor Peak. So the way, I think that I envisioned it or whatever would just be solely going to the chairperson, where they would have access to reply, because I believe we would get into open meeting law violations if they replied back with opinions and stuff like that, and it kind of went into that regard. So I think it would solely be the chairperson's email address or have access to it, and that would be the responsibility of the chair. I do think, and I think it should be open for anybody to request that information. To Peg's point, I think it would fall under that because it is a .gov email, and I think we should have that access to the public, and have that transparency, just like all the video footage and everything's already available to the public. So I think that kind of falls under that spectrum. And to the other point there with the having the conversation, obviously we can still have a conversation with anybody, but anybody that joins a committee has to go through the HR process with the open meeting laws, and they have to take that kind of learning program or whatever and do the sign-offs before they can get sworn into the committee. So there is where you have that check and balance of this is what open meeting laws are, this is your education on it, you're signing off that you understand. If you don't, ask questions and can get filled in on that as well. So I think, by creating this, yes, I do think we would fall into all those little parameters of open meeting laws and all that. But the individuals that would get that access to it would have go through that training and that sign off and everything else. So I think we should be covered in that regard.
Okay.
Thank you for tickling my brain, Councillor Coniff, about the open meeting law issue, because that was part of my thought early on of how that would work. And it's a good question even for now, if someone were to send a city-related question to a member of a committee and they happen to have their email, how that works. But something that I just thought about too is an alternative thing to think about here. And again, I don't know if this runs into open meeting law issues, but if essentially these emails didn't necessarily go to anyone as much as they created a distribution list. And so every time you emailed like planning board at easthamptonmass.gov, it just automatically emails everyone on the planning board, but not necessarily in a group, although that might be it sends it to them individually, but not as a group email. I don't know if that would become an open meeting law issue. It's just an alternative idea I'm thinking about.
Councilor Coniff.
So City Council has a distribution list, obviously. You type in City Council, it goes to all of us. I think that might create an administrative burden on the IT department in that committees kind of change a lot. And so he would have to be updating distribution lists quite a bit. I like the idea. I just think administratively it might be a little bit burdensome. But I do think, having it go to the chair and having the chair send it to everybody else. I mean, that's kind of the role of the chair. So I think it could work, but I like Bill's idea, and maybe we create kind of a, or piggyback onto whatever entry point HR uses in terms of things they have to sign off on and training they have to do. We add this layer, and maybe the layer is about, the kinds of things you put in email when you're under a .gov email. But it's completely doable, and it makes a ton of sense, and other municipalities do it, so it's not rocket science. So I'm really excited to go down this path.
So I have two thoughts. The first is that I feel like before we discuss the technical questions about how exactly these emails should work, we probably need to have we don't necessarily need to be here, but somebody needs to have a sit down with Ashley. Mm-hmm. Because we are saying, oh, would this be easier? Would this be easier? And one thing that I've found when I get into the world of IT is that a lot of the time the answers are counterintuitive. Things that you think, oh, well, that'll be really simple. Well, actually, that can only be done manually. But this thing that you think is insanely hard is actually pretty easy.
Yeah.
So I'd encourage maybe
I would like to see him here, yeah, at the meeting.
Okay. The other thought I had, and this is a little bit of a out of it's I don't know if I doubt there's a way that we're going to be able to make this work, but it did occur to me that if we're talking about make this fit, it's sort of a shame we aren't in a better place, because if we were like really done and ready to go with this, one thing I might even suggest is that we just put this in next week when we're talking about the charter as just an amendment for the charter review, which is something that counselors are completely able to do, because that really does seem like the appropriate place for this like sort of government structure kind of language. But like, unfortunately, well, maybe not unfortunately, but like, the window to handle that is, I mean, I guess that if there was a thought that it made sense, that could potentially be postponed or something. But do you see what I'm getting at there? That like, it almost seems that would be the sensible place to do this sort of thing. But I don't know whether we'd be able to meet. We certainly probably won't be able to meet with Ashley before Wednesday. So, Councilor Zaret.
I think those are good ideas. I guess just for clarification, because I always get kind of screwed up on some of this. So if correspondence is received by, say, a chair and then forwarded to an entire committee, and if they're just forwarding correspondence, that's not necessarily an open meeting law issue, correct? So, right, okay. So if we just get an email, say, theoretically, for a chair of a committee, and their job basically is to forward all correspondence to members of the committee, and then those members can answer it individually, much like we get for the city council all the time. People email all of us. That's acceptable and doesn't run into open meeting law issues, right?
Right.
Okay. So
the only time you run into an open meeting issue is if in that email you are essentially providing an argument for pro or con, because that's debate whether any of us respond or not.
Okay.
Right. If somebody just happens to email all 9 of us something, then that is what it is.
Right.
But if I then reply all and say, thank you for this helpful information, just so that you know, I intend to vote no on this, then
That would be bad.
then that would be no good. So, Councilor Zaret.
So if we create something in the charter where committee members have to have an easthamptonmass.gov email address, and B, it's the responsibility of the chair to forward all correspondence to other committee members, that kind of solves the issue of not then having to list every single person's email address also. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah.
That'd be one way to do it, is just say that, yeah, it's the responsibility of the chair to forward, just like Councilor Coniff forwards us stuff from the police department.
Sounds like a solution.
Well, I mean, is that something we want to consider, as the idea of this being used as a charter amendment? I mean, the thing is, if we're going to do that, I think we'll just have to, we're just going to have to work that out, like for the timeline. I mean, I don't think that hearing, like, we could do all of that stuff and then continue that hearing or something, but like, I don't want to speculate too much on the right way to do it. But like, that does seem like I mean, what do you think, President Coniff? Like, that does kind of seem like the document you'd want to put that in, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does feel like we're like, unfortunately, we're right up against it. And I would hate for this to in any way jeopardize the forward momentum we have on the charter, but I also believe it kind of belongs in the charter. And since we don't know if it is somewhere or more appropriately it lies somewhere else, it feels like the runway is way too short at this point to bring it in. And, there's other things that we can certainly do with the charter next year, and this could be added to it. But there seems to me that we could come up with a stopgap,
Right.
prior to putting it into the charter.
I guess the one way that we could do it would be if we had the public hearing, and if the public hearing were to be, we handled all the substantial things that are in the document. We went through all those changes, but then if there were any suggestions for changes like this from council members, that those be that the hearing be continued to the next meeting for us to specifically handle just those amendments. It's kind of a little unwieldy, but it that work.
So approve what we can approve, and then anything that requires amendments, hold those over to another public hearing the following meeting?
Yeah, if any counselors are submitting their own amendments, those get held over until the next meeting. I mean, the legislature isn't going to take this up until February at the earliest, one way or another. So it's not like it's actually time sensitive on our part. We just, for, the purpose of keeping things clean, felt that we should handle it.
That would be fun.
I'd be fine with that. And then I guess that would just be a sort of a process separate from this one. But I'm certainly happy to continue if we can get in the next few weeks, if we can get a meeting with Ashley to sort of discuss the logistics that would form the basis of such an amendment, or if you guys could maybe find a way to meet with him, in the next few days. Either way, if there's some way you could make that connection, that would be helpful. How does this sound on your part, councilors? Councilor Zaret.
I think it sounds great. It's actually more, initially I was trying to wrap my head around how we would do this legislatively, and I'm actually glad that it sounds like there's a way that falls within our powers to do so. So this is exciting to me, because I was worried we'd have to basically somehow make a request to the mayor to do this. And I think it sounds reasonable. I could see, I'm in no rush to do this as much as to get the process initiated. So I would go with whatever is easiest or pleases the general counsel. I think that the language should be able to be simple, that, all committee chairs shall be provided with an easthamptonmass.gov email address and shall be required to forward all correspondence to that address to all other committee members, or something of that sort. Whatever process and I could I'm certainly happy to talk to Ashley too. And then, so whatever process you think is going to make this most likely to be successful, I'm happy to participate in any of those.
Councilor Lynch.
Councilor Peak. I think it was Peg that was talking about it, and it sparked the memory when we got the new email addresses last year or something. We had to change the verbiage in, I believe it was the charter, to reflect our new email format, right? Remember,
actually, it was the city council rules.
It was in the rules? Okay. So that's not really the charter then. I was trying to look for it as when you brought it up, I was looking for it, but we could use that verbiage, and kind of find what exactly it says, and then just use that same structure.
Okay.
It says all city councilors are required to use the easthamptonma.gov email address for all email correspondence regarding city business. It is also recommended that all email correspondence, regardless of subject, be copied to the city clerk. We wouldn't add that, but that's what it says.
Okay. Well, this is super interesting. Is there anything else we can really discuss until we have a conversation with Ashley?
I think so.
I just want to thank you for taking this up. I mean, I think especially, the planning board's a big place where people feel really frustrated that they don't know who to contact. And I think it creates an air of opacity where it's certainly not there. I mean, for myself, I always try to direct people to the right departments. Departments are certainly easier to access, but I think it's important that we all be able to get the public access to the people they need.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
I think that's true. Yeah. And I think that there are people who just can't make meetings, for their work, or they've got really young kids, or, whatever, and they're just not able to make it. And they should still be able to, to make their specific thoughts heard. And actually, as we're working on this, that's actually one thing I would want to say is, I think that whatever the language that we uses, I think we need to make sure that it makes it clear that sort of forwarding, citizen opinions on things, if that doesn't happen automatically, that it is and really, like, I set up my email addresses to, like, if I get something from this email address, just forward it to my Gmail. So that shouldn't be super difficult, but in one way or another, that information has to reach something. Like, if you got a chair that received an opinion that they weren't receptive to, but some of their members would be, they need to understand that's not like an optional thing. Like, that information needs to go to, or this is my opinion anyway, is that information needs to go to the members, regardless of whether the content is something that the chair feels should be forwarded. That's my thought on it.
It also, I think having something like that also creates a little bit higher level of accountability / professionalism, so that, it just gives a higher sense of, this is really important what we're doing, and there's parameters around it. And yeah, so I think it's great. I think it's long overdue. So we just got to figure out where it best belongs. And if it's the charter, then let's, figure out a way to get it in there. It seems like a pretty easy thing.
Yeah.
But as with IT, things that seem easy are really not. So.
Great. Councilor Zaret.
So do you want me to reach out to Ashley, or will someone from this committee do so? I'm whatever works for you.
Well, why don't you have a preliminary discussion with him, and then from there, if it feels like, yeah, I mean, I think we'll probably will have to have him at a meeting, but it could be that it's really like he has one sentence of, it's either like, that's fine and we can totally do it, in which case I don't need him to necessarily work overtime. If everything he has to say could be like summarized in a short email and sent to us, then whatever. If he'd like to come and bat around ideas, I'm more than happy to have him.
Yep.
And why don't you, once you have that, why don't you just circle back with me and we can figure out, where to go from there, if that makes sense. Any other thoughts on this topic?
No, sounds good.
Great. Oh, do you have any thoughts? I haven't heard from you yet.
Apparently not.
Okay.
It was for me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm having some trouble with the internet. That's why
Oh, all right.
yeah, the internet kicked me out, and that's why I'm back. But no, I don't have anything to say. No, thank you.
Great. Well, thanks for joining. Okay, so I think that's basically resolved for now, or we're at a good stopping point there. Do you want to turn to the pilot? Okay.
You want me to go?
Yeah. So, Councilor Lynch, I sort of apologize. This has taken. This has been on the agenda for so long without us really working on it, and I think the reason is that it sort of coincided with the quarantine, and I think a similar thing happened in ordinance with the plastics ordinance, where when this happened, we were like, oh, this is going to be a whole conversation with a lot of people involved. Let's just wait until we're out of quarantine, and we'll just do it then. And then, well, it's going to be a while, and I think, we're starting to, look, we did the budget remotely, so I think there's sort of this thought that we need to start to be more just proactive about just doing these things and dealing with the fact that it's maybe going to be a little different. So I'd like to at least start to figure out a plan for how we address this. Councilor Rist was not able to be here tonight, but his, I'll read verbatim what he sent as in an email, because I think I think it's a good jumping off point into sort of the question about this issue. He said, before we take this item up, we must reach out to all players affected by this pilot, i.e. Williston, churches, or any nonprofits listed, just to sort of make sure that I think it's Councilor Rist's feeling that there should be like the various folks who potentially might be paying a pilot would should have an opportunity to participate in this discussion, and so that was like sort of a thought was like, okay, so how do we best do that? And I'll just open this up if anybody has any thoughts about that. Councilor Lynch.
So, I definitely agree. I think we should invite people in and have a conversation. I have no problem doing that. Just by us adopting this resolution, did I freeze?
Yeah. You may want to turn your camera off, Bill.
Are you done sick of looking at me?
No, it just makes it a little bit faster.
All right. So I don't know if I cut out or not, but what I was saying is I have no problem reaching out to anybody and having people coming in. The pilot resolution would be negotiated with the mayor. So not everybody could be impacted. Everybody could be, but not everybody maybe. Am I still cutting out?
No, you're great now.
Oh, not bad.
Okay. Because you guys all froze. So I think I'll just stop looking at it so that I'm not distracted by the frozen faces. I guess it would be a negotiation with the mayor. So everybody would be, able to kind of go back and forth with the mayor at that point. So, we can invite, there's a lot of people, if you looked at the list, there's a lot of nonprofits, but she may not feel like going after religious people, she may not, churches and stuff like that. She may not want to go after schools. She may not want to go after different organizations. This pilot program, some other cities, when I looked at them, excluded certain organizations and types of nonprofits. I felt we would include everything and then let her decide, or whatever mayor decide, that would take part in the negotiations, who they wanted to go after for a payment in lieu of taxes. And that didn't take anything off the table. I do think that there's a lot of businesses in town, and I wouldn't really know how to go about the first part of just contacting everybody. I mean, emailing their addresses, I guess, would be, or sending a letter to their address. I don't know what the easiest way would be. Some of them are out of Springfield, some of them are out of Boston, and they just own the property here. So I'm up for suggestions on trying to reach out.
Councilor Coniff.
Bill, I don't have it in front of me, but is the Excel file that you created, is it sorted by dollar amount, like highest to lowest? Bill, you're on mute.
Yep, I'm sorry. I'm trying to go through my windows because I have it open. The highest to lowest, I believe it was an Excel. Hang on. I don't think it was highest to lowest. Let me close out some of this other stuff here. Let me get back to you.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because I know when Northampton did this, I think the mayor only reached out to 3 entities, Cooley Dickinson, Smith, and I believe one other one. And each of them had their own individual response. Each issue was handled independent of the next. So I almost feel like we could make a recommendation for the top 3 or 4 and say this is where we think where we think it makes the most sense to do a program of this nature with these 2 or 3 or 4 recipients. I don't see any need to go after an entity where we would get $1.50. I mean, that seems kind of ridiculous. So I think what we're saying here is that there are entities that occupy a big space in the community, and therefore, let's discuss payment in lieu of taxes. So if there's a way to rank order that by dollar amount, I also recognize there may be individual entities that roll into one. So we may need to look at that as well. So I think that's how we evaluate it. And then as a committee, we talk about whether we exclude religious organizations or if we exclude something else. That's all part of the conversation, I think.
Okay. Any Councilor Lynch?
Sorry, I had to turn my video on so you could see my hand. So I have, it's not an Excel sheet, it's actually a Word document, but I have the totals for everybody by their rank. And what it was it was created by the first property, because I went off of the street listing. So Adams Street was first, and then it kind of went through that. So as I got additional properties from that organization, I added it to it. So South Middlesex Nonprofit Housing Corporation has an Adams Street, a Main Street, Main Street, Main Street. So they have 4 locations. Total property value is $1.566 million. Their 25% pilot would be $6,000. I mean, I could go kind of do a summary page, I guess, and we could look at it. The only concern, that I would have with that, approach, Councilor Coniff or President Coniff, would be, the way I looked at it personally was, let's give the green light to the mayor. And I know how Northampton did it. They just did the 3 organizations, which was the schools and the hospital. But I just feel if we put everything out there and allow the mayor to negotiate it, as she's building a budget for next year or whatever, she can go to these individuals, and that's the same conversation around, like what do they already do for the city in-kind donations and stuff like that, like that's part of the negotiation process that was also built into the resolution, because I don't want to take away from what they already do for our community. And there is a ton of things that, other organizations do that we may not even be aware of, because it's not in front of us financially or sent to us for our agenda items. So I just think, I'd hate to pigeonhole it to 1 or 2 personally. That's my opinion. I think laying all the options on the table for the mayor to work with would be my recommendation, but we can discuss.
Okay. I have a couple questions. So I'm a little bit familiar or unfamiliar with sort of the pilot process outside of a little bit of stuff around UMass Amherst. But is the passage of a resolution like this, does that give any sort of additional leverage to the mayor in those negotiations? Are those things that the mayor's currently not able to engage in?
So I think it kind of gives the legislative support for, the mayor to go in and negotiate. I believe by law, she can technically go and do these. And I think there was a pilot agreement with the solar fields already on the Park Street there. Jeff Bagg mentioned it in part of the conversation when he was presenting it back when we were at 50 Payson. So I think there is the ability to do it in certain areas. This would give her the ability to do it with our support, across the other nonprofits in regards to property taxes. I think the solar farm was like a different agreement, with the purpose of what that brings to the community, where it's generating the power and stuff like that, and we get a percentage of it in lieu of taxes, I think is how that one works. This would just be the green light to go after property taxes for the physical properties that they own. If that helps answer anything.
I think it does. So we're just basically the purpose of this resolution would just be to express council support for the mayor doing this thing that she already has the authority to do.
I believe we need to pass it to give her the authority and have it on the books in order for it to actually happen. I think we have to have it on the books, and it has to be an approved resolution in order for her to be able to negotiate. But there are already other forms of this that she's able to do.
Okay, great. Councilor Coniff, I saw your hand.
Yeah, so I don't know if she needs our recommendation to go forward. I think it might show leverage a little bit. I think she can do it or not do it regardless of what we say. She can thank us politely and not do it even after we make the recommendation. And from what I recollect from Northampton, it really amounted to a letter from the mayor to the organization saying, here's the deal. We would love it if you would, do whatever. And in some cases, letters came back that said, thanks, we're already doing enough. And that was the end of it. So it really is just, which is why I tend to not think we need to give the whole list to her. I think if we're going to make a recommendation to the mayor, I feel like putting parameters around it to, we think you should go ask these 3 would be potentially more powerful than saying you pick 3 off the list, or, you know, you pick and choose, or go after all 100, however many there are. I feel like if we just narrow it down, then the focus is a little bit more succinct. But regardless, I'll go back and look at the rule, the law around this, but I don't think she needs city council approval. I think she can do it or not do it at her will. But I don't know.
Councilor Zaret?
First of all, I just want to thank Councilor Lynch for bringing this forward. I think it's a really important topic that's probably long overdue. I think it's been discussed in various ways, but I don't really know how far the council's ever gotten before with this. Listening to the deliberations here, I've been going back and forth between President Conniff's point of view and Councilor Lynch's, and I don't know if I've come to a conclusion yet. I think obviously if this was some form of ordinance, we'd have to do what Councilor Lynch is suggesting, because that would have to apply to everybody. But I think that the purpose of this generally is that there are certain entities in the city which own large and very valuable amounts of property, and specifically just in terms of sprawl and kind of purchase and removal, therefore, from the tax records of property, have kind of affected our ability to raise income via property taxes. And I think that that's kind of what this is geared towards, I believe, in a nutshell. So I think, two things is, one, I think right now, in this moment, I would agree with President Conniff that we should probably pick the ones that probably are the biggest, the most valuable properties and entities. Again, like, because I think from a moral, ethical standpoint, I would agree with Councilor Lynch that we should just say everybody and then leave it up to the mayor to decide. But from the purpose of a resolution, it might kind of direct it a little more, like President Conniff is saying. And then, yes, I think that the mayor could do this any day, but I think what this process does is really draws attention to a much needed topic. I think that's kind of been on the back burner for a while, and creates council support for it, because we'll see how that vote ultimately would go, and B, public engagement, because if we hold some sort of a vote for this, I'm assuming the public's going to show up and weigh in, and it's going to show how the city feels about this, as opposed to if the mayor were to have just gone about this, it wouldn't necessarily need to involve such a public and forward-facing piece.
Okay. Well, what do you think, what should our next step be here? I have some ideas, but I want to hear from everyone else.
Well, I think I was just looking. I actually can't find the list. I know I had it at one point, Bill. So if somebody could resend me the list, because I don't know where I filed it, because wasn't it like March-ish when all of this came down that you sent it?
I think it was February. Let me flip it to everybody right now.
So I'd like to have the list. I'd like to look at what we're dealing with here in terms of the who and the how much, and create kind of a plan for the recommendation, and then, kind of work through that conversation around what that might look like.
March 18th.
Oh, that was like 5 days after the state of emergency.
Okay. One thought I had that I could see maybe being useful. Last year, I remember when we did the row resolution, there was a thought that this was important enough and public facing enough to actually hold a public hearing in the committee. I think that usually happens once a year. The year before it was on the Safe Cities thing. We held a public hearing within the committee to that would be like very early 2018 we did that, which, you know, and we took sort of the time to get the word out and actually hold a public hearing within the committee for everyone to come, so that we could basically, because we wanted, well, in this particular case, I think that could be a valuable thing, just so that we could get some community feedback while it's still in committee and while still sort of working on the specifics, that we can.
I mean, kind of like the dog park. Didn't we do that with the dog park?
We did that for the dog park. I'm kind of wondering if that might not be a bad idea to try and get something going in, I don't know, late September, early October, you know, just so we have a few weeks to get the word out. And I mean, I'm just brainstorming here. Councillor Lynch, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. That's fine with me. I definitely want to hear as much input as we can, you know, and I don't even know if people might frown on it given the pandemic and everything. I mean, times have changed even since we've put it on the agenda, you know? Yeah,
sure. Councillor Gomez, I saw your hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just was reading the resolution. The resolution didn't have any names. The resolution only have numbers. So I know Councilor Conniff was talking about bringing probably three entities from the city. Probably the biggest one or the biggest will cost more money. But the resolution didn't have any particular name on it. They bring numbers, and with the resolution basically is telling the mayor that we are supporting her action if she will take any action. But they didn't bring any names.
Okay. Okay, great. So let me think. Yeah.
If you made me a co-host, I can share that with you if you guys.
Sure. Yeah, let's do it. Should be good.
Yep. Let me get it. Just 1 second. Do you see it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me.
Okay. Right.
So the reason I think this resolution got a little bit of attention was because there's only one name on this resolution, and that's Williston. And so I think it got a little more attention because they were effectively called out. So if we're going to do a resolution, it either has to be completely agnostic to any particular properties, or we modify it so that we list on page 2, 3 or 4 or 5 or 20 areas that the mayor could focus on. I think by listing Williston, this resolution looks like we're only asking her to go after Williston. And that doesn't seem appropriate for a resolution. Unless we're saying we only want you to talk to Williston about this.
Councilor Lynch?
So that's just the title page. That was just kind of going over. There was actually a page before that that is the introduction and kind of the explanation of what a pilot is and everything else. And then I used the largest tax exempt property to kind of recap how it worked out and what it would be.
Okay.
The resolution is that last page, just there. So I close it out right before the
Okay.
Northampton.
I didn't see that last page. Sorry, Bill.
Yep. So I close it out right before the Northampton hyperlink that I send with their resolution program to show that. So it's just an example. And I just said I used the top one.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome.
Councilor Zaret? You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Do you think there would be any consideration for some sort of almost a compromise between kind of a kind of global application and what President Conniff is suggesting, where we kind of create a threshold of property values that we would have the mayor consider, so that implicit in that is that, smaller, potentially single properties, single building properties, and or just kind of smaller entities, we're not really interested in addressing this for a variety of reasons, but that the intent here is to kind of keep our eyes on larger properties here and say, values over X amount are ones we'd be requesting pilot payments from.
Councilor Lynch, you had your hand up.
I hear what you're saying. The only concern I have is that there's some large organizations, nationwide organizations, et cetera, that only own one or two properties in town. Like the Boston and Maine Railroad Company owns part of property in town. And they're a larger organization that I think could help out if the mayor wanted to go to that, and they could probably come to a negotiation, a little easier than what you're looking at. I think is just like a one, property owned little individual organization that they only have one property and its value is minimal. And they probably couldn't afford to do anything. I think that would be the discretion of the mayor not to go after, a small organization like that. But we have smaller ones that are national organizations. That's all. Thanks.
Councilor Zaret?
Councilor Lynch has won me over. I feel like I sound like Councilor Rist. You've won me over, Bill. I think that maybe the intent of the resolution should just be to evaluate properties for pilot programs and leave it at the discretion of the mayor, kind of who is evaluated for the program. I still agree with the spirit of what President Conniff said, but I think ultimately this is just directing the mayor to, or not even directing, requesting the mayor to do something, and she could choose to apply any number of filters to this, like what President Conniff recommended, or anything else that was discussed here.
Yeah, I guess on that note, maybe the question that we should be, and we don't need to, if we're planning on doing a public hearing, we don't need to decide all the answers tonight, but maybe one way to start thinking about it are there any sort of types of properties that we specifically really don't want the mayor to go after? If we decided, for example, that, and I'm kind of agnostic about this, but if we said, for example, that educational institutions or religious institutions or something like that, where we say, oh, well, really, they shouldn't be, then that's something where we could sort of say, this is a group we really would not like the mayor trying to negotiate a pilot with. But I don't, unless we have like a specific reason why we think that there's a group And I guess, yeah, size could be a relevant reason, although, like Councilor Lynch states, like the size of the properties owned by an organization in Easthampton is not necessarily indicative of the size of the amount of resources that an organization might have. So, Councilor Lynch.
Thank you. And I appreciate that too. The idea of the pilot program is to pay for, services provided by the community too. The police, the fire, the MT, the roads, and everything else that we use. And it's to supplement the community for the use of services provided. And I think that everybody, every organization, no matter how big or small, has the ability to use our emergency services and everything else, at really no expense at this point, and that's kind of the idea behind this is how do we, get a little bit back to help pay for, the services provided by the community, at no expense. And the taxpayers are the ones that in essence pay for everything. So I think that's really, like what the whole idea behind this is we're providing services to all of these groups, organizations, and everything else. At any point in time, they can call 911 and have an ambulance there at any organization, anytime. And I think that looking at that, is a reason to allow the mayor to, kind of go after some sort of compensation. And it doesn't have to be every organization like we've already discussed, but I think just the ability to do so, if need be, is what the idea behind it is.
Okay. Councilor Coniff.
I also think the other positive thing, I guess, if you want to call it that could result from this is kind of an open explanation by some of the larger areas around what they in fact do provide to the city. It may not be very well understood by either the existing residents and taxpayers or even us, to the degree that some of these entities may already be providing monies or in-kind contributions to the city. And it might be beneficial for all of us to know that and to create a different awareness / appreciation for what maybe is exchanging hands and for the services that we provide. So I think there's a lot of good that can come out of this, both financially for the city and also public relations between taxpayer and these entities that don't currently pay taxes.
Great. So, I guess my next question, if the idea is that we're going to hold a public hearing in committee about this, is there any thoughts on timing? Any sort of deadlines we need to be thoughtful of when we're thinking of doing this? I do definitely want to give it a few weeks so that we can publicize it. But are there any other considerations that we should be thinking about?
The only consideration that I think we need to be cognizant of is that certainly we will get the attention of Williston. If we do it in the September-October timeframe, they are just ramping up to educating students in a COVID world. And that could be a little tough for them to, because I think they deserve, and all of these entities deserve a right to present their case at a public hearing. And that might be dicey, the timing of it, but we can talk about that. I absolutely think September's too soon, and I'm a little on the fence about October, but whatever you guys think at this point.
Any other thoughts, Councilor Lynch?
I agree with Peg on that. I think September might be too early. I think, mid-October would be the starting point that we should begin to look at for them.
All right. Well,
I
if
think
it's
it's fair.
October, then maybe what makes sense, this is just my thought. I'm sorry, Bill, did I cut you off?
No, I don't think so.
Great. Maybe what makes sense is to keep this on the agenda. Let's handle the other things that we have right now and then come back to it, because that would probably put us somewhere in early to mid-October, if I'm being reasonably optimistic about our ability to do work. So that puts us back there around then, and then, from there we schedule something. How does that work for you, Councilor Koff? You're muted.
Sorry. Yes. I didn't realize I was on mute. That works.
Oh, okay, great. All right, well then, does that, Councilor Lynch, does that work for you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's just keep it on the agenda. We'll come back to this in a few weeks and start, looking to schedule a date for a public hearing. Okay, anything else on this topic?
Yep.
All right. Well, I said publicly that these were going to be the two things that we were going to be discussing. So I don't want to go into too much detail about anything else, but Councilor Coniff, do you have anything else you want to discuss?
No, just on continuing business, we have Charter Review Committee discussion. Did we not remove that without prejudice?
We did remove that without prejudice.
So we want to just...
I will follow up with, well, I think we haven't, I guess we haven't, I'll check in with Barb and make sure.
Okay, because I thought we voted that.
I was at the last meeting, and you guys just vote to remove it
Yes.
without prejudice. Yeah.
Yep.
So, okay, great. That works. Okay, so I think this feels good. We have sort of a path forward for both of these things. So I'm pretty satisfied with that. I know that there's some interest in getting the ordinance review stuff off the ground. I've kind of been enjoying our every other Thursday schedule, so that would put us on Thursday the 10th for our next meeting.
I am not in town then, but
Okay.
you can certainly go forward without me.
Well, there's only 3 people, so it would be. Would the
You've got that whole week.
you're out that whole week?
Yeah, so you guys can go forward. I mean, that's fine.
Well, okay. In that case, let me talk. I'll send something out to you and Councilor Rist, and since he's not here anyway, and let's try and nail down a fairly close by time where all 3 of us can.
Yeah, and alternatively, Councilor Peak, if you promise not to keep me for 3 hours, I certainly could dial into a meeting while I am at the ocean. So entirely, I'm open to that as well.
Make sure that if you do that, you get like a beach chair and like have the ocean behind you and just like look out so that it's just really clear to everyone else. Like, you
I
have a
can do
beautiful
that.
sunset and just
I
like,
can do that.
oh, it's great. Look at this beautiful sunset on the beach.
It's like when Councilor Gomez was in Puerto Rico and he had behind him some lovely scenery.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's, I'll send an email about that and we can figure something out.
Right.
We'll figure something out. Okay. Anything else?
Motion to adjourn?
I'll second that. Councillor Coniff.
Aye.
And I vote aye. Thanks, everyone. I will talk to you all soon,
Bye, guys.
if not before then.